Sergeant Daniel Reaper. Hayes lay on his back, tasting blood and dust. The metallic tang of his own suffering coated his tongue as he blinked away the haze of pain. His ribs were shattered, his left leg a ruined mess of blood and shrapnel, and his right arm barely had the strength to lift. Around him, the battlefield smoldered, the night air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burnt flesh. The world had become a graveyard. Above him, the Galactic soldiers laughed. Their voices, guttural and sharp, rattled in his ears like a blade, scraping a crossbone. They stood tall, their armored frames reflecting the eerie blue glow of the dying fires. 8 feet of muscle and chitin, with elongated, skull-like faces and glowing, predatory eyes. They moved with the confidence of conquerors, their clawed feet crushing the bodies of fallen human soldiers as they circled their latest prize, him. One of them crouched beside him, prodding his broken ribs with the barrel of a plasma rifle. Hayes swallowed the scream bubbling in his throat, refusing to give them the satisfaction. "This one is still alive," the alien sneered, his voice thick with amusement. "Resilient little creatures, aren't they?" Another soldier, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His armor was blackened with the soot of battle, his insignia marking him as the leader of this execution squad. Lieutenant Kvaris. Hayes had heard the name whispered in dread over comms before they were overrun. "Alive," Kvaris repeated, his voice silk smooth, almost disappointed. "Then fix that." A sharp, barking laugh erupted from a group. One of them raised a boot to stomp down, aiming to crush Hayes' skull. He moved before he could think. His broken body protested, agony ripping through his nerves as he twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the impact. The alien's boot slammed into the dirt where his head had been, the force sending a shockwave up Hayes' wounded leg. His vision blurred, but he gritted his teeth and clenched a fistful of dirt, holding on to consciousness by sheer force of will. The Galactic roared in amusement. "Still struggling," one said. "Pitiful." Hayes breathed hard, forcing himself to focus past the pain. He had seen what these monsters did to prisoners. There were no transports waiting to take captives away, no cells in which to rot. The Galactic believed in absolute war. No surrender, no mercy. They didn't take prisoners. They took trophies. Nearby, other wounded humans were dragged across the dirt. Some were already dead, their bodies mutilated for sport. A few remained conscious, forced to their knees, awaiting execution. Hayes caught the wide, terrified eyes of a young private. Just a kid, maybe 19, shaking so hard his restraints rattled. Kvaris turned his gaze toward the prisoners, then back to Hayes, something cold and calculating behind his glare. "You humans," he mused, "are so fragile. Yet you endure beyond reason. Why is that?" Hayes didn't answer. He simply locked eyes with Kvaris, forcing himself to smile through the blood coating his teeth. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the grin of something that refused to die. Kvaris chuckled. "No matter. You'll be dead soon." He turned his back, motioning to his men. "Make it slow. I want to hear them scream." 2 Galactic stepped forward, raising their rifles. Hayes flexed his fingers, curling them around something cold, half buried in the dirt. A combat knife. It wasn't much, but it was enough. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he steadied his breath. The Galactic didn't see him as a threat. Not anymore. He was wounded, broken, helpless. That was their mistake. They loomed over him, rifles humming as they prepared to fire. Hayes didn't wait. He moved. With the last reserves of his strength, he drove the knife upward. The blade punched through the first soldier's exposed throat, severing muscle and artery in a single motion. The alien let out a gurgled snarl, staggering back, clawing at its wound as dark blood poured down its chest. The second soldier barely had time to react before Hayes twisted, yanking the dead alien's plasma pistol from its holster. He fired. The plasma bolt struck center mass, burning through armor and bone. The Galactic crumpled. For a split second, there was silence. Then all hell broke loose. Shouts erupted as the remaining Galactic scrambled, weapons raising. Hayes was already moving, his battered body a screaming protest of pain as he lunged toward cover. What was left of a ruined transport vehicle. Plasma fire sizzled past him, scorching the air where he'd been a moment before. His lungs burned. His leg barely functioned, but adrenaline numbed the worst of it. He wasn't dead yet. You dare. Kvaris' voice was thunderous now, all amusement gone. You think you can fight? Hayes pressed his back against the wreckage, reloading the stolen pistol with shaking hands. Blood dripped from his temple, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was outnumbered, outgunned. His body was failing, but he wasn't afraid. He flicked his gaze toward the human prisoners. They were watching, their terror momentarily replaced by something else. Hope. Hayes grinned again, tasting blood, and locked eyes with Kvaris. Yeah, he rasped. I do. And then he fired. The plasma bolt struck one of the soldiers dead center, sending him collapsing into the dirt. A second shot, and another alien dropped. Chaos erupted as the Galactic scattered, the arrogance in their stance replaced with something almost resembling uncertainty. Hayes knew he wouldn't last long. His body was failing, his odds were non-existent. But if he could make them afraid, if he could remind them why humans were never to be underestimated, then it would be worth it. Kvaris bared his fangs, fury rolling off him in waves. Kill him. Hayes smirked, gripping his stolen weapon with bloodied fingers. They should have killed him when they had the chance. Hayes moved before his body could register the pain. He rolled to the side, just as a plasma bolt seared the metal behind him, the heat kissing the back of his neck. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pressed himself against the wreckage, gripping the stolen Galactic pistol so tightly his knuckles ached. The aliens were regrouping fast. He could hear them, heavy boots crunching against scorched dirt, guttural voices barking orders. They weren't laughing anymore. Good. He peeked over his cover. 4 of them had fanned out, using the wreckage and bodies as partial concealment. Kvaris stood at the center, plasma rifle raised. His reptilian eyes locked on Hayes with an expression that could only be described as cold fury. Hayes knew his situation was impossible. His body was failing. His vision blurred at the edges, black creeping in. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from blood loss. Even so, he smiled, teeth red with his own suffering. Because the moment Kvaris had ordered his men to kill him, they had stopped focusing on the prisoners. And he wasn't the only human left alive. A flicker of movement to his right. One of the younger soldiers, a private, had loosened his bindings while the aliens were distracted. His hands were free, fingers curling around a jagged piece of shrapnel. Not much, but enough. Hayes exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. He only had 1 shot before they overwhelmed him. Kvaris lifted his rifle, aiming directly at Hayes' head. Enough of this, he snarled. Die, human. Hayes fired first. The plasma bolt hit the alien closest to Kvaris, punching through his chest. The Galactic let out a strangled gasp before collapsing, smoke rising from the hole in his armor. Chaos erupted. The remaining soldiers turned, weapons raised, but the distraction had cost them. The private lunged from the dirt, driving his shrapnel into the nearest alien's exposed joint. The Galactic howled, staggering backward, and another human broke free, grabbing a discarded rifle. The fight wasn't over. Hayes forced himself upright. Every nerve in his body screamed, but he ignored it, squeezing the trigger again. Another plasma bolt struck true, dropping a 3rd alien. Kvaris was already moving, his speed inhuman. He dodged between the wreckage, plasma bolts sizzling past him as he advanced. Hayes barely had time to react before the alien slammed into him, knocking the pistol from his grasp. They crashed to the ground, Hayes' already broken ribs grinding together. He choked on the pain, struggling against the weight pinning him down. Kvaris' claws wrapped around his throat, tightening with lethal intent. "You think you are strong?" Kvaris snarled, pressing harder. "You are nothing." Hayes clawed at the alien's grip, vision darkening. The world faded into static. Then, through the haze, he saw it, his combat knife, half buried in the dirt, just inches from his fingers. He reached. Kvaris leaned in, his breath hot against Hayes' face. "You should have stayed dead." Hayes' fingers closed around the hilt. With the last of his strength, he drove the blade upward. The knife punched into Kvaris' side, just beneath his ribs. The alien roared, jerking back, but Hayes twisted the blade deeper, pushing until the hilt hit armor. Kvaris staggered off him, clutching the wound. Hayes coughed, gasping for air as he scrambled back, every muscle in his body trembling. The battle around them had shifted. More humans had broken free, using stolen weapons to fight back. The remaining Galactic were struggling, their overconfidence shattered. For the first time, real uncertainty flickered in Kvaris' eyes. Hayes spat blood, leveling his gaze at the alien. "Yeah," he rasped. "We're nothing, right?" Kvaris bared his fangs, fury twisting his features. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The battlefield was chaos, a writhing mass of gunfire, screams, and the acrid stench of burnt flesh. Plasma bolts ripped through the night, casting eerie blue light over the carnage. Human prisoners, once bound and awaiting execution, now fought with stolen weapons, their desperation turning to savage determination. The Galactic, once so certain of their victory, were reeling, caught in a battle they hadn't expected, against an enemy that refused to die. Hayes pushed himself up from the dirt, knife still slick with Kvaris' blood. His vision swam, body barely holding together, but he refused to stop. The pain no longer mattered. The odds no longer mattered. He had seen it, the flicker of doubt in Kvaris' expression. The Galactic commander had never expected this. Hayes bared his teeth in something between a grin and a snarl. They should have killed him when they had the chance. A guttural roar split the air. Kvaris charged. Hayes barely had time to react before the alien was on him, plasma rifle swinging like a club. He ducked, but not fast enough. The weapon's heavy stock smashed against his shoulder, sending him sprawling. Agony erupted down his arm, but he rolled with the impact, coming up on one knee just as Kvaris lunged again. The alien was fast, impossibly so. Hayes barely managed to twist away as razor-sharp claws slashed through the space where his throat had been. He retaliated, stabbing upward with his combat knife, but Kvaris caught his wrist, twisting with brutal force. The knife clattered to the ground. Kvaris slammed him against the wreckage of a downed transport, pinning him in place. Hayes gasped as his battered ribs ground together, pain exploding behind his eyes. "You fight like an animal," Kvaris hissed, pressing harder. "Wild, reckless, but you are weak." Hayes' breath came in ragged gasps. His strength was failing. His body was failing. But his mind, his will, remained unbroken. "Weak?" He forced a bloody grin. "You think this is us at our weakest?" He spat blood onto the alien's armor. "Buddy, you've never seen us at our worst." Kvaris' eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the battlefield. The force sent both of them tumbling apart, dust and debris choking the air. Hayes hit the ground hard, but so did Kvaris, momentarily stunned. A human soldier, one of the prisoners, had commandeered a plasma grenade, using it to take out a cluster of Galactic reinforcements. The tide was shifting. Hayes coughed, forcing himself up. Kvaris was doing the same, shaking off the disorientation. Their eyes locked once more. This wasn't over. Kvaris let out a low growl, rising to his full height, towering over Hayes. "Enough of this," he snarled. He reached to his side, drawing a massive, curved blade from his belt. The metal gleamed in the firelight, wicked and serrated. Hayes wiped blood from his mouth, flexing his fingers. His knife was gone, but that didn't matter. He had something better. His mind. He exhaled slowly, watching, waiting. Kvaris advanced, blade raised. Hayes feigned weakness, letting his stance sag, his knees buckle slightly. A predator like Kvaris would see it as confirmation that the human was spent, barely holding on. Kvaris lunged, aiming for his throat. Hayes moved. At the last second, he twisted, dropping low. The blade whistled past his head, missing by inches. Before Kvaris could recover, Hayes surged upward, ramming his shoulder into the alien's chest with every ounce of strength he had left. Kvaris staggered, off balance. It was all the opening Hayes needed. He grabbed the Galvaric's own wrist, twisting brutally. The alien's grip faltered, and Hayes wrenched the blade from his grasp. Kvaris barely had time to react before Hayes drove the weapon deep in his side, burying it to the hilt. The alien let out a choked sound, eyes widening in shock. Hayes twisted the blade. Kvaris collapsed. The battlefield had gone quiet. The remaining Galvaric, seeing their commander fall, hesitated. Doubt, fear, things they had never felt in battle, now clawed at them. Hayes pulled the blade free, staggering. He was barely standing, his body failing, but he refused to fall. One by one, the Galvaric began to retreat. They had come expecting slaughter. Instead, they had found something else entirely. A fight they couldn't win. The remaining Galvaric hesitated, their confidence shattered. Their commander lay bleeding in the dirt, a look of stunned disbelief frozen on his reptilian face. They had believed themselves superior, invincible. Now, their dead littered the battlefield, and the humans, bloodied, battered, but unbroken, were still standing. Hayes swayed on his feet, exhaustion pressing down like a lead weight. His ribs screamed, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he kept his grip firm on the serrated blade, still slick with Kvaris's blood. The alien leader wheezed, his massive chest rising and falling in stuttering jerks. His golden eyes, once full of arrogance, now flickered with something else. Not just pain, fear. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant crackle of fire and the labored breathing of the wounded. Then, a low, desperate growl rumbled from one of the Galvaric soldiers. It was a sound of denial, of refusal. No, the soldier snarled, stepping forward, his plasma rifle trembling. This is wrong. He is only one human. Hayes turned his gaze to him, and whatever the alien saw there made him stop cold. One by one, the remaining Galvaric lowered their weapons, stepping back. Their bravado had drained from them like lifeblood from an open wound. Their species had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed countless civilizations. But this was something else. Hayes could see it in their faces. The beginning of understanding. Not all enemies fell to brute strength. Not all wars were won by superior firepower. Some battles were lost the moment fear took root. Kvaris choked out a wet, rattling breath, his claws twitching weakly in the dirt. He rasped, voice barely a whisper. You are monsters. Hayes exhaled sharply through his nose, a humorless sound. He took a step closer, towering over the fallen commander. No, he murmured, his voice hoarse but steady. We're just human. Kvaris shuddered, his body giving one final spasm before going still. The light in his golden eyes dimmed, then vanished entirely. It was over. The remaining Galvaric didn't need to be told twice. They turned, some moving in quick, jerky motions, others hesitating for a heartbeat longer, as if still struggling to process what had just happened. But in the end, they all did the same thing. They ran. Hayes let out a slow breath as the last of them disappeared into the darkness. His grip on the blade loosened, and finally, his body decided it had reached its limit. His knees buckled. Strong hands caught him before he hit the ground. "Easy, Sergeant." It was the young private, the one who had turned the tide when all had seemed lost. His face was streaked with blood and soot, but his eyes were sharp, alive. "We've got you." Hayes blinked up at him, lips twitching into something that could have been a smile. "Damn right you do." The remaining human survivors gathered around, exhaustion and relief etched into every line of their faces. They had come so close to death, but they had fought, endured, and won. One of the soldiers glanced at the retreating aliens, his voice thick with disbelief. "They were so sure they had us. What changed?" Hayes let his eyes drift back to where Kvaris lay. He thought of the Galvarak's last words, of the terror in his gaze as he realized what he had underestimated. He thought of every species that had ever looked down on humanity and assumed weakness. Hayes coughed, tasting copper, then grinned through blood-stained teeth. "They learned," he murmured. "Too late."